Hello, welcome to the course of Organic Production and Certification. This is, in fact, the first part of this first lecture. I wish during this lecture a good trip and hope that you will enjoy it. Okay, the title of the first lecture is Introduction to Organic Production. Now, in the next slide, I will show you the main issues that we discuss during this lecture. I just want to remind you, it is Introduction to Organic Production. Now, let's have a look in the content of this first lecture. We'll start with a short story of agriculture, because the history of agriculture is very related to the human story, to the humankind. From this, we can understand the role of the humans and the problems of agriculture of our times. We'll speak about agricultural systems that we know in this time, that we practice in different countries in this time. And then we'll jump to the concepts of sustainable agriculture, because we'll be focused during all this course on the sustainability of agriculture, which is reflected to the organic agriculture. We will speak about concepts and definitions about organic agriculture. So let's start with the story of agriculture. I don't know if you agree that agriculture is equal human society. According to me, when somebody decides to speak about agriculture, she cannot avoid to speak about human history. Because humans could not survive without agriculture, at least based on nowadays technology and lifestyle. The history of agriculture is the story of humankind's development and cultivation process for producing food, feed, fiber, fuel, and other goods by the systematic raising of plants and animals. This is the definition that New World Encyclopedia gives in the history of agriculture. This here down, you have the link that can click or consult if you are interested. Here we have a very nice, interesting image. What it is? It is a scene of a farmer that is plowing his soil. We see an animal, we see the plants in the background, and we see the plow, that is wood plow. This image shows that the age of this finding from the archaeologists is about 10,000 years before the Christ. Okay, let's speak about history of agriculture. Before the development of plant cultivation or before the development of agriculture, human beings were simply hunters and gatherers. They were hunting and gathering in the huge areas, wild areas and forests. And their product was the way how they were fed. Then the development of agriculture played a huge role in human civilization, because there was a reciprocal relation and impacts. There is mutual relation and impacts between agriculture and civilizations. For example, agriculture helps civilization to develop other technologies. Why? Because when people had enough food, started to look around and explore and create new tools, for example, tools of metals. Agriculture influenced the social structure. It made possible the cultural exchange through wars and occupations. Through wars and occupations, people were in contact with each other, so in this case they could exchange their cultural, they could exchange the knowledge, they could exchange the domesticates and how to cultivate or how to keep them, how to raise them. In the past, the majority of the human population worked in agriculture. It is a matter of fact. So it was very important. Today, in developed countries, it is less, but in other countries, still huge share of population works in agriculture. The documentation of history of agriculture, in fact, begins in the Fertile Crescents. The Fertile Crescent area is an area included in the Western Asia. It includes the regions of Mesopotamia and the Levant, confined by the Syrian desert in the south and Anatolian plateau in the north. We can mention the countries that are included in the Fertile Crescent area. These countries are Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories. All of them, as I said, are included in the Fertile Crescent area. The term Fertile Crescent is for the first time used by James Henry Brissett. He was an archaeologist in the 19th. In another way, it is called the cradle of civilization, since the hill the writing first appeared there. In fact, it's difficult to give the precise place where the agriculture started, where the agriculture beginnings are. But it's logical that transition from purely hunter-gatherer societies began many thousands of years before the invention of writings. So there is not any written document or written document when the societies went from hunting and gathering to the agriculture societies. In fact, not in written form, but in other form, there is a much earlier evidence for use of wild cereals. For example, anthropological and archaeological evidences indicate use of wild grain in Southeast Asia and North Africa about, think about, 20,000 years before the Christ. Most certainly, there was a gradual transition from hunter-gathering to agricultural economies after a lengthy period during which some crops were planted and other foods were gathered in the wild. So, it is documented that about 11 to 10,000 years before the Christ, the first crops and livestock were domesticated. This was stimulated by cultural exchange, population resource depletion, if we can say, climate change. It is documented that about 10,000 till to 7,000 years before the Christ, domestication of plants and animals was done in the centers of origin. Humans invented agriculture during the Neolithic era or the New Stone Age area, between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago. For example, there were 8 Neolithic crops that, from the documents, we know that at that time were domesticated. For example, emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, peas, lentils, bitter vetch, wheat, barley, chickpeas, and flax. However, as I mentioned before in the previous slide, there is earlier evidence, not written, but other type of evidences that plant cultivation and trait selection more than 10,000 years before the Christ. And let's go further. Let's come more near to our times. For example, about during the period of 7,000 to 300 years before the Christ, there are documentation that shows that migration of the people, of human population happened. The migration of human population was done with domesticates. And in this way, migration could spread the culture of cultivation, so the agriculture. And step by step, in a long time, people started to adopt different techniques of cultivation. Just to give an example about Egypt and Mesopotamia. There is evidence that suggests that irrigation first appeared in Egypt and Mesopotamia in the 6th millennium before the Christ. Different people groups began digging and repairing channel networks which helped them to regulate the flow of rivers such as the Nile River in Egypt. The oldest method of irrigation, which made use of man-made underground streams called canals, is still being used in parts of the Middle East. But what are the reasons for the development of farming? It is thought there are two main reasons. One is the climate change. Localized climate change is the favorite explanation for the origins of agriculture in the Levant area. But, as I have mentioned in the previous slide, the social reasons are another reason for agriculture farming. For example, accumulation of food surplus for competitive gift giving is found to be one of the causes in the Pacific Northwest potlatch culture. The other is that the fact that the farming was invented at least 3 times elsewhere, and possibly more, suggests that social reasons can be an important instrument. Full dependency on domestic crops and animals did not occur in one day, doesn't occur in a short period. It did not occur until the Bronze Age. After the time, wild resources were not significant in the nutrition of the people, of the human beings. For example, the Sumerians, starting about 5,500 years before the Christ, developed an agriculture of large-scale, intensive cultivation of land, monocropping, organized irrigation, and use of a specialized labor force. Intensive farming allows a much greater density of population than can be supported by hunting and gathering. This is known. It is sure, and allows for accumulation of excess products for off-season use or to sell to barter. The agriculture helped to feed large numbers of people whose activities now had not to do with production. It was a crucial factor in the rise of standing armies, for example. So when the people had enough food, then they started to think for other things, and then started specialization, and this could increase the population. In the Middle Age, European farmers began using complex irrigation systems such as dams, reservoirs, and water raising machines. They also developed the three-field system of crop rotation, and the mold-board plow was used. These inventions greatly increased the efficiency of agriculture. And for your further information, for example, it is found that between the 17th century and 19th century, Britain experienced a dramatic increase in agricultural productivity known as the British Agricultural Revolution. This revolution consisted of a variety of improvements to agricultural methods which took place more or less simultaneously, so in the same time. Farmers developed new methods of crop rotation, for example. They began cultivating land that had been marshy or forest, and it was planted with new crops such as the turnip. Here you have a very nice image that is an archaeological found, and the title of this is a Gallic Roman harvester. This image shows in the stone the people are doing agriculture. Now here you have an image that is trying to summarize what I spoke before. So here let me show with red. So here you have earth, and here you have different areas in the world where their findings shows when the cultivation started. From this we see that the earliest area where the agriculture started to be practiced and the cultivation started was the Levant area, that is in Near East, and the plants that were cultivated at the time was wheat and barley. And the second place, the area where the cultivation of the plant started is in the North China. Other things to be stressed is that even the documentation, written documentation, shows the agriculture started later than 10,000 years ago. In fact, it is even before. And probably could be other areas that has been even before, but since the written documents are not in this period because the writing was invented later, we cannot have this kind of documents and this kind of documentation.